When we first spoke, you and I talked about Leonard Bernstein, and I talked about this wonderful YouTube video that's out there, and it shows Leonard Bernstein conducting, and he's just got this smile on his face, and then all of a sudden he puts his hands down. He's not waving them in front of the audience, and then all of a sudden he closes his eyes, and he's just smiling, and there's this beautiful music coming out. And I mentioned that to you, and you said to me, you know what that is? Yeah. And I said, what? And you said, that's trust.
That's right.
He's trusting himself. He's trusting the orchestra. Can you talk more about trust? Because that comes up a lot with the CEOs and the teams I work with, and how it relates to music and back and forth to the business world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. And I think you hit the nail on the head, because I mentioned earlier when we were talking about speeding up or slowing down that you have to trust the orchestra while you kind of get out of the way beforehand. I also mentioned that an orchestra can go a lot more than just a couple of bars without the conductor getting up in their business. I mentioned that this has a lot to do with being able to trust the orchestra, but that actually begins with trusting yourself, right? You have to trust that you have done the work, that you have prepared the orchestra in such a way. I mean, I feel like, I didn't mention this during our chat, but I feel like 95% or something like that of my work actually happens in rehearsal, because that's when I can actually interact with the orchestra. That's when we can take bigger risks, because there's no audience there, there's no public. If we screw something up, who cares? There's nobody there, right? And so I oftentimes push both myself and the orchestra to extremes that we wouldn't do in performance, just to show them that they can trust themselves, they can trust the process. I mean, this is an absolutely crucial component, to my mind anyway, of being a leader. And when you watch Leonard Bernstein in that video, which is an extraordinary video, I mean, I will say, he doesn't conduct much in that video at all. It's like a 4-minute movement of a Haydn symphony, I think. I will mention that he is conducting it with the Vienna Philharmonic, which is possibly the greatest orchestra in the world. So, the risk level is not that high. And frankly, Lenny by that point was in his late 60s. His career was also fine. So in the extremely unlikely event that something went wrong, everybody would have been okay. But it is a magnificent, I totally agree, it is a magnificent demonstration of trust. And again, that starts not just with your colleagues, it starts by trusting yourself and that you've done the work that you need to do. Other questions?
Right here. Yeah, you said 2 main pillars were your vision and then truly listening to your team. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how you handle when listening kind of goes against your vision. Say who started in 1961 cellists don't agree on a point. How do you handle that situation?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, pardon me. One of the things that I learned with the Cleveland Orchestra, and it kind of reflects that thing that I mentioned about the better the orchestra, the more they want to be led. I also learned that the orchestra doesn't particularly care if they agree with the decision you make. They just want you to have made a decision. When I was in grad school, I did this masterclass in San Francisco, conducting masterclass, and it was actually run by my teacher's teacher, my grand teacher is what I call him. And he said, you're such a good studier, Brett, that you can see both sides of every issue. And that actually gets in your way on the podium. He said, you have to be able to see both sides, of course, but then you have to make the decision, right? I mean, if I can see a reason in the score why maybe this note should be long, or I can also rationalize why this note should be short, well, just because I can see both sides of the issue doesn't mean that that's helpful to my team. What's helpful to my team is making the decision. The team wants somebody that is that is reliable enough, that they trust enough, and that is confident enough in the work that they've done, that they will follow that decision, regardless of whether they personally agree with it or not. And this has also a lot to do with, if you look at my bookshelf at home, lots of music books, of course, lots of books on leadership, also lots of books on group psychology, because that's really what I'm doing. Every time I'm in front of an orchestra, I am trying to convince 100 people that the way I think this thing goes is the way we should be doing this right now. Doesn't mean that it doesn't change the next time we do the piece, but you do have to make that decision. And as I mentioned, Margaret is the cellist who's been with us since 1961. Margaret's actually, at least to my knowledge, I think, one of my biggest fans in the orchestra. We get along really well, and as I said, it comes back to the work and having done the work. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Let's wait for the mic, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How does diversity play a role when you're selecting your orchestra? How do you go about doing that?
In terms of personnel?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting process in terms of bringing new people into the orchestra. For a long, long time, like so many things, orchestras were the sole purview of basically white men. And there are still a good number of white men playing in these orchestras. But when, I think this was like the early 1970s that this practice started, to try to weed out maybe some undue influence or prejudice or whatever it was, we started having what are called blind auditions. So, for example, last year we hired a new principal bass of the Colorado Symphony. And throughout the entire process of this blind audition, the orchestra panel is usually like 10 people or so that are on the committee, and I sit on stage on one side of a big curtain. And the musicians who are auditioning are on the other side of the big curtain. And for this principal bass position, we actually left that curtain up throughout the entirety of the process. So we had no idea who the person was. Could have been anybody. So because we have those blind auditions, it's actually quite difficult to more consciously try to increase the diversity. But I will say that if you do go to orchestras now, which I hope you all will, it's right across the way, for heaven's sakes, that if you do go to an orchestra, you will look back 50, 60 years ago and you'll see a bunch of white guys on stage. And you look now and you've got people of every race. You've got, I think in American orchestras now, I think women actually slightly outnumber men, which is great news, I think. So there is that diversity that has been achieved through the blind auditions, but beyond that, that's how we achieve that in the orchestra world, at least as of right now, and it has to do with fairness in terms of audition practices. Yeah.
Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
An orchestra has the advantage of playing the same piece at the same time, at the same tempo. In business, we have diverse groups, departments, offices, whatnot, not always in harmony. So what do you see from the music world that translates to the business world in terms of taking those disparate pieces and being the maestro?
Well, to some extent, that's what I do. I know this is tacky, but let me scroll backwards and get you to the score that I was showing before. So unfortunately, it's not grouped particularly clearly on here, and yeah, there you go. But you can kind of see, so the flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons are at the top of the score, and those groups are called the woodwinds. And then there's the horns, which is written as corny, then the trumpets and the timpani, that's the brass and the percussion, and then violins, violas, cellos, and basses are the strings. So yes, the end goal is certainly a homogenized sound, and you say we're all playing the same piece at the same tempo and all of that. Come to a first rehearsal, and you will find a very different set of circumstances. There are varying degrees of quality in concert halls. Concert halls, the best concert halls let people hear across the stage very well so they can hear what their colleagues are doing. Not every concert hall in the world is the greatest concert hall in the world, which means that quite often the musicians in the wind section, for example, can't actually hear what the musicians in the string section are doing as well as they should. So my job is to do actually exactly what you're talking about, which is to take these disparate groups, which are separate from each other spatially, and at the beginning of the rehearsal process, sometimes separate from each other temporally, and try to get them onto the same page. And that really has to do with what I was talking about in terms of understanding the big picture and being able to let the clarinets know, for example, in this excerpt from Beethoven. I always think this is the funniest orchestration that Beethoven ever did. This big, famous, aggressive opening, and it's all the strings, and then for some reason, like 2 clarinets join in. But you have to make those clarinets understand where and how they fit in to that texture. So it is a little more similar, I think, than, as I said, come to a first rehearsal and you'll see that not everybody is on the same page. We've got about 2.5 minutes left, so we'll do 1 or 2 more.
This is kind of a comparison between Beethoven and Mandy, because I too was struck by the Mandy song on a car trip from LA to Pasadena one day and fell in love with the song. And it's kind of a schlocky song, Mandy.
No.
It is. Yeah, we know it is. But it's a great song.
It is.
Well, from your point of view today, after your Beethoven and your Mozart and your Brahms and your Mahler, why is it such a great song?
It's a great question. There is something in pop music, which is what I grew up with. These songs, especially back in the 70s, you're not going to find a 4-minute pop song. I mean, unless it's, the rare Don McLean thing here or whatever. But there's something in that 3.5 minutes about the directness of expression that there's, as opposed to like a Mahler symphony, which can be an hour, hour and a half even. And Mahler said a symphony should be like the world. It should contain everything. Well, a pop song is basically the opposite of that. A pop song is trying to express one thought, one affect. And somebody that cares as much about expressing that affect as Mr. Manilow does. By the way, this is what a great son I am. I don't mind saying this. I have taken my mother not once, but twice to see Barry Manilow. My spot in the will is secure. No, I think it has to do with the directness of expression. Barry was asked once, and I actually apply this myself a lot on stage as well. He was asked, how do you get up, how do you sing Mandy and Even Now and Weekend in New England, and I write all of these great songs that he had back in the 70s. How do you sing all of those songs and not become emotional? And he said, oh, I do. I just do it in my living room. Because by the time I'm on stage, my job is to move other people. And I can't move other people if I'm so busy being moved. So I think it has to do with the directness of expression. Classical music is a much larger art form, takes a lot longer to get into, takes a lot longer for composers to make their point sometimes. It's part of what I love about it, but it's one of the reasons I still listen to pop music to this day. Thank you guys very much. I hope this has been helpful to you. Have a great week.